There is something incredibly comforting about seeing a large amount of cash sitting safely in your bank account. Not invested, not exposed to market crashes, not bouncing up and down every time a news headline appears, just sitting there. Stable, predictable, available whenever you need it. For many people, that feeling is the definition of financial security. It's the moment when years of hard work finally start to feel worth it. You spend years hearing the same advice. Save your money, avoid debt, build an emergency fund, and always have cash available for unexpected situations. So when you eventually reach a point where you have a meaningful amount of money sitting in a high-yield savings account, it feels like you've done everything right. A few years ago, I found myself in exactly that position. After years of working, saving, and trying to be financially responsible, I had accumulated roughly $50,000 in cash. Instead of leaving it in a traditional savings account earning almost nothing, I moved it into a high-yield savings account. At the time, interest rates were attractive. Banks were offering rates that felt almost unbelievable compared to what people had become used to over the previous decade. Suddenly, money sitting in a savings account was actually earning something meaningful. Every month, I watched interest payments arrive without doing anything. No extra work, no side hustle, no stock picking, no real effort at all. The money seemed to be growing on its own. At first, the experience felt fantastic. There is a psychological benefit that comes from knowing your money is safe and accessible. You sleep differently when you know a major car repair won't destroy your finances. You feel differently about your job when losing it wouldn't immediately create a crisis. Financial stress is one of the biggest sources of anxiety in modern life, and having a large cash reserve creates a sense of protection that is difficult to describe unless you've experienced it yourself. In many ways, the emotional return was just as valuable as the financial return. And that is exactly why this topic is so complicated, because what I eventually learned had nothing to do with whether high-yield savings accounts are good or bad. The real lesson was understanding what role cash should play in a person's financial life. Like many people, I originally believed that a larger savings balance automatically meant I was making financial progress. The larger the number became, the more successful I felt. But after spending a long period watching that money sit in cash, I began to realize that financial security and wealth creation are not the same thing. They often look similar from the outside, but they operate very differently beneath the surface. One of the biggest reasons high-yield savings accounts became so popular is because they solve a problem that traditional banks ignored for years. For a long time, many savings accounts paid almost nothing. People would deposit thousands of dollars and receive a few dollars in interest over an entire year. Meanwhile, inflation quietly reduced the purchasing power of those savings. It felt almost insulting. Then interest rates increased, and suddenly savers could earn 4 or 5% on their cash. For the first time in years, saving money felt rewarding again. When you have $50,000 earning 5% annually, the numbers appear impressive. 5% of $50,000 is $2,500 per year. That's real money. For many people, that's enough to cover a vacation, several months of groceries, or a significant portion of annual utility bills. Looking at those numbers, it's easy to understand why millions of people move their money into high-yield savings accounts. Compared to earning almost nothing, it felt like a financial breakthrough. But then I started asking deeper questions. The first question was surprisingly simple. How much of that money do I actually keep? Most people focus on the interest they earn. They don't focus on what happens after taxes. In many countries, interest income is treated as ordinary income. That means the government takes a portion of every dollar you earn through interest. Suddenly, the headline rate and the actual rate are not the same thing. A savings account may advertise 5%, but your real after-tax return could be noticeably lower depending on your tax situation. Then there's inflation. Inflation is one of the most misunderstood forces in personal finance because it operates quietly. You don't receive a bill labeled inflation expense. Instead, you notice that groceries cost more than they did a year ago. Rent increases. Insurance becomes more expensive. Restaurants raise prices. Travel costs climb. Almost everything slowly becomes more expensive over time. This creates a situation where your savings account balance can be growing while your purchasing power grows much more slowly. Imagine your money earns 5% in a year while inflation runs at 3%. On paper, your account balance increased by 5%. In reality, your purchasing power only improved by roughly 2% before taxes. Once taxes enter the equation, the gap becomes even smaller. That realization changed how I viewed the interest payments appearing in my account every month. They were still valuable. They were still better than earning nothing, but they weren't creating wealth at the rate I originally imagined. The headline number looked impressive. The real-world result was much more modest, yet even that wasn't the biggest lesson. The biggest lesson was opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is one of the most important concepts in finance because it measures what you give up when choosing one option over another. The problem is that opportunity cost is invisible. If your investment loses money, you notice immediately. If your account balance falls, you feel the pain. But when you miss out on potential growth, there is no notification, no warning, no statement arrives in the mail explaining what could have happened. While my money sat safely in cash, global businesses were continuing to grow. Companies were developing products, expanding operations, generating profits, and increasing shareholder value. Over long periods of time, diversified stock market investments have historically produced returns that significantly exceed cash savings. Not every year, not every decade, but over long stretches of time, productive assets have generally outperformed cash. That doesn't mean investing is risk-free. Far from it. The stock market can be brutal in the short term. Prices fall, recessions happen, fear spreads, investors panic. Anyone who has experienced a market crash understands how emotionally difficult investing can be. A savings account rarely creates that kind of stress. That's one of its greatest strengths. But there is another side to that stability. The more money I accumulated in cash, the more comfortable I became. The more comfortable I became, the less urgency I felt to invest. Without realizing it, the size of my savings account started influencing my behavior. I felt financially successful because I could see a large number every time I opened my banking app. That visible progress created a sense of accomplishment. The problem was that accomplishment sometimes replaced action. I delayed decisions. I postponed investments. I spent less time thinking about long-term wealth creation. After all, everything seemed fine. That is one of the hidden psychological costs of holding large amounts of cash. The security is real, but it can sometimes reduce the motivation to pursue growth. When people talk about personal finance, they often focus on numbers. They rarely discuss behavior. Yet behavior frequently determines financial outcomes more than mathematics does. What eventually changed my perspective was realizing that every dollar should have a specific job. Some dollars exist to protect you. Some dollars exist to grow. Some dollars exist to provide flexibility. Problems arise when we assign the wrong job to the wrong money. Emergency funds should absolutely be kept safe. If you need money within the next few months, exposing it to market volatility can create unnecessary risk. Cash is incredibly useful for short-term goals. It's useful for emergencies. It's useful for major purchases planned in the near future. But money intended for goals that are 10, 15, or 20 years away operates under a completely different set of rules. Long-term money has time to recover from downturns. Long-term money has time to benefit from compounding. Long-term money has the ability to participate in economic growth. Treating long-term money like emergency money may feel responsible, but it can sometimes become expensive over decades. One of the most fascinating discoveries in financial research is that wealth gaps often grow not because people earn dramatically different incomes, but because they make different decisions about what happens to their savings. Two families can earn similar salaries throughout their careers and end up in completely different financial positions years later. The difference is often determined by how much of their money spent time growing versus how much spent time waiting. That idea forced me to rethink my own approach. I stopped viewing my savings account as a wealth-building tool and started viewing it as a protection tool. Once I made that mental shift, everything became clearer. The account wasn't failing. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was protecting liquidity, reducing risk, and providing stability. My mistake was expecting it to accomplish goals it was never intended to achieve. The truth is that a high-yield savings account is one of the best financial tools available for certain purposes. It offers liquidity. It offers safety. It offers predictable returns. It reduces financial stress. Those benefits matter. They are valuable. They deserve respect. But wealth creation usually requires something different. It requires patience. It requires accepting uncertainty. It requires allowing productive assets enough time to work. The most important lesson I learned from keeping $50,000 in a high-yield savings account wasn't about interest rates. It wasn't about banks. It wasn't even about investing. It was about understanding the difference between feeling safe and making progress. Those two things are not always the same. A large savings account balance feels reassuring because it represents certainty. You know the money is there. You know where it is. You know how to access it. Human beings naturally love certainty, but financial growth often comes from embracing reasonable uncertainty. The businesses that create wealth are uncertain. Markets are uncertain. Innovation is uncertain. Progress itself is uncertain. The challenge isn't choosing between safety and growth. The challenge is knowing when each one matters most. Looking back, I don't regret keeping that money in a high-yield savings account. It provided stability during a period when stability had real value. It helped me sleep better. It gave me confidence. It reduced financial stress. Those benefits cannot be measured entirely by percentages or spreadsheets. What changed is how I think about cash today. I no longer ask whether my money is safe. That's only half the question. The more important question is whether my money is performing the job my future needs it to perform. Because financial success isn't determined by how large a number appears on a screen today. It's determined by what that money helps create tomorrow. And that's the lesson I wish I had understood long before I ever reached $50,000 in savings.